Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Steve Edwards, the Executive Director of the Institute of Politics, and thank you so much for your patience. We are thrilled to have all of you with us for today's session, a conversation featuring our very own David Axelrod with Arianna Huffington. Many of you have seen complimentary copies of her latest book, The Sleep Revolution, on your chair. That will be part of the conversation today, of course. Chelsea Fine will do our formal introduction and talk more about Arianna Huffington's background and give you a full bio, but many of you know her to be one of the most thoughtful and interesting and path-breaking commentators on our political and cultural landscape over the last really 25, 30 years. So we're excited to have her here. Before we jump into the session, I just want to point out a few things coming up at the IOP next week. We have Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, a series of events. On Monday, the 2nd, we'll have Washington correspondent for Time Magazine, Jane Newton-Small, on her new book, Broad Influence, looking at women in politics. Very critically acclaimed book and should be a great conversation. So that's Monday night. Tuesday night, we'll be back with a debate on the Second Amendment in collaboration with FIRE. That's Tuesday night, the 3rd at 6 o'clock. Wednesday night, Frank Bruni of the New York Times will be with us to talk about politics in 2016, and particularly the Trump phenomenon. And then on Thursday of next week, the 5th, filmmaker and Oscar award-winning director Oliver Stone will be here to talk about his work in making political films, and specifically a series that he recently did on political history and a new look at American history through an alternative lens. So that's Monday through Thursday, great events. You can find out more at politics.uchicago.edu. All right, let me turn the microphone over to Chelsea Fine, who many of you know. She's a 4th year here at the university, majoring in public policy. She hails from Washington, D.C., has been very active in the IOP over the last few years, where she currently runs as co-editor-in-chief our student-run political review called The Gate. So please join me in putting your hands together for Chelsea Fine. Chelsea?
Thank you, Steve. Arianna Huffington once said in an interview that her biggest pet peeve is when people take pride in working 24/7. Needless to say, it's probably a good thing that she's only on campus for a couple hours. She joins us today to discuss her new book, The Sleep Revolution. I was excited to read this book because, like so many of you, I work too hard and sleep too little. In fact, having turned in my thesis yesterday, I'm speaking to you now on so little sleep that I feel incredibly hypocritical delivering this introduction. College, as Ms. Huffington puts it, is a laboratory for burnout. UChicago is so demanding, from schoolwork to extracurriculars, that we forget to take care of ourselves. And I will be the first to admit that I am guilty of this. Ms. Huffington can inspire all of us to succeed. She is, after all, co-founder and CEO of Huffington Post Media Group and author of 15 books. She has been named one of Time Magazine's 100 most influential people and one of Forbes' most powerful women. I urge you to listen to this talk not because her credentials are off the charts, but because her message speaks to all of us. Sleep is eminently important, and we are very lucky to have Ms. Huffington with us today. So please join me in welcoming Arianna Huffington to the University of Chicago Institute of Politics.
Thank you so much, Chelsea. I feel like we should all excuse you to go have a nap. Thank you for inviting me to be here. I'm so delighted to be with Susan and David Axelrod, who've been old friends, and to see you again in your hometown. And I'm thrilled to be bringing this message to the university because I believe that we need a culture shift around sleep. That it has been a very long time, actually since the Industrial Revolution, that we have tended to devalue and scorn sleep, and the results have been very damaging to our health, our decision-making, and our happiness. And I bring this message to you as somebody who's done it all wrong for many, many years, and didn't wake up to the truth until I collapsed from burnout and sleep deprivation 9 years ago, almost to the day, in April 2007. hit my head on the way down, broke my cheekbone. And looking back, I feel that this was an incredible blessing, because if I had not course corrected, I think I would either be dead or incapacitated with something a lot more serious than a broken cheekbone. And I say that because as you look around, you see the casualties of this delusion proliferating. We have CEOs and executives collapsing, like the CEO of United collapsing on his treadmill with a massive heart attack, the CEO of BMW collapsing on stage, the head of M&A at JP Morgan collapsing and dying on his treadmill. And it's actually interesting that so many executives are collapsing on the treadmills because we have convinced all these type A personalities, many of whom I'm sure are in this room, that working out is important and that nutrition is important. But the third leg of the stool, which is actually the first leg of the stool, is sleep. And what happens, you have all these executives, and I've talked to many of them, who set the alarm way too early, before their bodies are fully restored, to get to the gym, because, hey, they are type A's, right? They can get to the gym. It's another thing to do. While sleep is not a thing to do. It does something to you, and therefore you're not in control, which is very scary. So they get to the gym, but all the scientific evidence now shows that getting to the gym when you're sleep deprived doesn't help your health or your weight. If anybody's interested simply in their weight, the worst thing you can do is go to the gym sleep deprived, because the hormonal changes in your body when you're sleep deprived are going to take you to consume more carbs and more sugars. So I start like that with my own personal goal, which has been growing as a mission since my own collapse, to help us change our culture around how we prioritize sleep. And the reason I structured the book this way, and I'm so glad you all have a copy, is I wanted to start with the crisis of sleep, just to make it clear how many dangers we are facing because of it, of sleep deprivation. But the second part, which is in a way my favorite chapter, is the science chapter, because it gives you all the scientific data why we are so wrong. And you may wonder, how can an entire culture be so wrong? Well, entire cultures are often very wrong. You're all too, probably most of you, too young to remember that there was a time in the not too far distant past when we used to think that smoking was okay. In fact, you had doctors advertising cigarettes. And I think sleep deprivation is very soon going to be seen as the new smoking. And what has happened when you go to the history chapter after the science chapter is you'll see that since the Industrial Revolution, we started basically treating human beings like machines. And the goal with the machine is to minimize downtime. And we thought this had to be the goal with human beings too. But human beings are not machines. And that's what we are realizing now with the new science, which is very young. The first scientific sleep center was founded at Stanford in 1970. And now there are over 2,500, including here, the University of Chicago, that has done some very interesting research included in the book. And for me, some of the most fascinating research, there are 50 pages of scientific endnotes for the real nerds in the room. But for me, the most interesting is what happens to the brain when we're asleep. Because we used to be under the illusion, including scientifically, that sleep is a time when the brain is inactive. The metaphor was you're putting the car in the garage and turning the ignition off. And now we know that actually sleep is a time of frenetic activity in the brain. It's the time when all the accumulated toxins of the day are cleaned up. And if they're not cleaned up, the dangers are horrendous, from loss of memory to Alzheimer's. And as the scientists who came up with these findings put it, the brain has two functions, either alert and awake or cleaning up and asleep. It can't clean up while it's alert and awake. So my metaphor is that actually sleep is now like your car becoming a driverless car and running essential errands for you. You want that to happen. And the other thing that's fascinating is how the culture is beginning to change. And the pioneers of change are actually athletes. Because athletes are all about performance, they have discovered the connection between sleep and performance. So often we give up sleep in the name of performance and productivity, but in fact, getting enough sleep means that we're going to operate at peak performance. And I just actually did a video interview with Andre Iguodala, who just posted on time.com. It was in the courts of the Golden State Warriors in San Francisco, and he even tried to teach me how to play with disastrous and embarrassing results, as you're going to see. And he has tracked his stats since he started getting 8 hours, and they're just phenomenally improved. And I'm so happy that Danusha, who is a phenomenal gymnast from UCLA, is here with us. I met her at UCLA, and she has kindly joined our sleep fair. And you should definitely talk to her about the influence and the importance of her improving her sleep habits has had on her performance. And now we are having companies beginning to enter the sleep game. You probably will hardly believe what I'm going to tell you, but I promise you it's true. It happened after my book went to press, so it's not included. But Mark Bertolini, the CEO of Aetna, has now given all his employees Fitbits to track their sleep, and if they get 7 hours or more, they are paid $25 a night. Now, leaving aside the financial reward, to have a CEO encouraging employees to sleep in the name of performance, productivity, and reducing healthcare costs is revolutionary. And one more revolutionary thing that happened after my book went to press, David and I were talking about how do culture shifts happen, and when I think different centers are beginning to change habits and reward different behavior, you know we are reaching a tipping point. So 2 weeks ago, there was an article in the Harvard Business Review, which was an extract from a very long piece from the McKinsey Quarterly. McKinsey, the boiler room of burnout, right? In which they track the connection, as they call it, between effective leadership and sleep. And it's all scientifically based. What happens to a prefrontal cortex, which is where executive functions of leadership are housed during sleep deprivation, is to degrade every function of leadership. And they actually track that, and it's a very powerful piece. And what makes it almost funny is that it was co-authored by their chief global learning officer and a woman, Els Vanderdam, who was identified as McKinsey's sleep specialist. Now, when McKinsey has a sleep specialist to encourage their executives to sleep rather than not sleep, you know the revolution is happening. So I'm looking forward to my conversation with David and to your questions. So let me wrap up what I'm going to say by looking at how do we go from understanding the science, understanding how we got here through the history, looking at the mystery of sleep, which is also fascinating, and I have a whole section on the mystery and dreams. How do we go from changing our minds about our sleep to changing our habits about our sleep? First of all, I want to make it clear this has to be the order. Please don't jump to the second part about changing your habits. Because if you don't convince yourself that it's important to change your habits, that sleep matters, you're not going to stick to it. So once you've convinced yourselves, there are tons of techniques and tips and micro steps that you can take to get enough sleep. First of all, let me clarify what enough sleep is. According to all major scientists, unless you're in the small minority of people who have a genetic mutation and are what scientific circles call short sleepers, and you can do great on 4 or 5 hours, unless you are one of these people, the rest of us need 7 to 9 hours. Within the 7 to 9 hours, you just need to find out what is your number. But you cannot train yourself to have a genetic mutation. And once you recognize that, then you begin to treat yourself as well as we're now treating our smartphones. Because right now we're treating our smartphones better than we're treating ourselves. Like, I bet everybody here knows approximately how much battery remains on your smartphone. In my case, if it gets below 13%, I begin to get anxious. And I look around for a recharging shrine, lest anything would happen to my phone. But if you had asked me the morning I collapsed, Arianna, how are you? I would have said fine. Because really, I had forgotten what it is like to operate on 100% battery. And I thought that being perpetually exhausted, sleepwalking through my life was normal. And that's the attitude that has to change. And I'm going to give you just one major tip that is really the most important, which is you need to create a transition to sleep. Make like a clear demarcation line between your day and the night when you're going to recharge. Those of you who are parents, I don't think there are many parents here, but those who are, know that you don't just drop your baby in bed and close the door. There's a ritual. You give it a bath, you sing it a lullaby, you say good night moon and good night everything. And we need to have something similar with us. You can create your own ritual, but there is one non-negotiable part, which is at least 5 minutes before you're going to turn off the lights. For me, it's 30 minutes now. But it took me a little while to get up to 30 minutes. I turn off all my devices and gently escort them out of my bedroom. If you're in a dorm room and you don't have anywhere else to escort them, find a box that you put your phone in, then find a suitcase that you put the box in, then find a really high shelf that you put the suitcase in, then lock the suitcase, then put the lock somewhere far away from your room. My point is that if you wake up in the middle of the night, and it's perfectly fine to wake up in the middle of the night, nothing wrong with that. What is wrong is to immediately go to your life. Go to your phone, go to your texts, go to your notifications, your social media. Because that's when you allow your day life to intrude again into the time to recharge. And because we're all addicted, let's face it, we have to make it very hard for us to get that phone. So in the sleep fair that we're having here, the University of Chicago is one of about 120 colleges we're doing sleep fairs in, because we really want to reach students while you're still in college, when you really believe the dictum, grades, social life, sleep peak too. And sleep is not peaked, and how untrue that dictum is. Or I'll sleep when I'm dead, or all these things that college students tend to believe. We believe that if we can reach you and convince you that you are going to be better at everything, including grades, if you get enough sleep, we are going to be able to change the world and achieve this tipping point that we are looking for. So if you haven't already been there, our sleep fair is across the street at the Reynolds Club. And in order to entice you to get there, we've partnered with a lot of brands to give you free things. Like pajamas, eye masks, white noise machines, Remodel, which is a company that remodels your bedroom, your dorm, and gives you a lot of things to make it more sleep-friendly. Up? Everything okay? So all that is going on at the Reynolds Club, and we'd love you to go visit. And Pete, I don't know if Pete is here. Pete is here from the Sleep Number. Here he is. His Sleep Number is our partner in putting the tour together. So, and you can talk to our editors who are there, who can give you personal sleep coaching. I'm going there straight from here, so I can do some sleep coaching too. The goal is to convince you about the importance of that transition. And for me, beyond taking my device out of my room, it includes having a bath. If you don't like baths or you don't have a bath, a shower, something that basically, once again, washes away the day, and this is the time to recharge. And in bed, only reading physical books. I will consider it a personal victory if you are reading The Sleep Revolution in bed and it puts you to sleep. So let me wrap it all up by saying that ultimately, sleep is also a gateway to the mystery of life. You know, beyond sleep being a great performance enhancer, it also helps us remember that we are more than our grades and more than our jobs, however magnificent they are. And those of you who've been to a memorial recently know that our eulogies have very little to do with our resumes. And you've never heard anybody eulogized by saying, you know, George was amazing, he increased market share by 1/3. So it's important to also remember that wherever you are on the spectrum of belief, there is a lot of mystery to life. And sleep and dreams are another gateway to that. So come for the job-enhancing or grade-enhancing benefits and stay for the life-enhancing benefits. And for me, the ultimate way that I know whether I've gotten enough sleep is, am I bringing joy into everything I'm doing during the day? You know, I used to think that getting stuff done is enough. But everybody in this room has demonstrated you can get stuff done. You would not be at the University of Chicago if you couldn't do that. So why not also enjoy the journey instead of simply checking the boxes? And anytime I feel that the joy is not there, I know there is something wrong with how I'm approaching my life. So sleep is another reminder that, as I like to say, life is a dance between making it happen and letting it happen. So thank you for being here, part of the sleep revolution, and please spread the message. Thank you.
I must say, as I was listening to you,
You fell asleep.
recalled. No, I listened to you with rapt attention. I told you I slept last night. I slept a good long night because I didn't want to become a negative example. But I do remember my time as a student at the University of Chicago, and I often actually caught up on my sleep in class. That was where I did it. But it does raise this question of different demands in our lives. All these students have enormous demands on them, but there are people who, you know, you wrote another book called Third World America, yes, about the stress and strain on working class Americans, many of whom are working several jobs a day and so on. So what do you do about that? What do you do about the fact that a lot of people they're filling their time because they have to in order to get done what they have to do in order to fulfill their obligation?
I'm so glad that you're starting with this question, because I believe that wherever you are in the socioeconomic brackets, whether you are like at the top navigating multiple demands on your time, or at the bottom trying to make ends meet, if you get enough sleep, everything will be better. And let me give you an example. We recently took over a church in Harlem and invited the local community to come in and find out about sleep. And we had doctors, and We had sleep fairs like we have in colleges. And I want to tell you one story that sums up kind of a heartbreaking truth. This was a woman in her 30s who had 2 jobs to make ends meet. She was a pastry chef and a babysitter. She was very overweight and had diabetes. And she described to me her life. And she said, I get home from work, and this is my time, she said, to watch my shows. So she watches television for 4 hours, falls asleep watching television. At some point, the television wakes her up. It's hard for her to go back to sleep because she hasn't done the transition to slow down her brain. So she goes to the kitchen and eats something sweet because she's sleep deprived and craves sweets. And the cycle continues. And what is the saddest part is that she thought the fact that she was exhausted all day on 4 hours sleep was her fault, because she had believed the collective delusion that if you're a Wall Street high flyer, then you would be able to do your life on 4 hours, which is kind of the mythology of our culture. So we started working with her, and we had her on Dr. Oz's show, changing her habits, and everything in her life began to change. Her health outcomes began to change. She had to give up watching the shows. So we, all of us, wherever we are, we have more discretionary time than we think. You know, somebody is watching House of Cards. It's not me. I've only watched 1 episode because I had to sacrifice something, and House of Cards was an easy sacrificial lamb in my life. So the idea that sleep is like at the bottom of the totem pole affects every class. And I believe that if we can change our understanding of its importance, if we can really convince people, as they say on aeroplanes, to put their own oxygen mask first, it will change health outcomes, and it will change a sense of resilience about life that helps people navigate difficult circumstances. It's not going to be an alternative to a lot of other things you and I have been talking about that have to be done, like increasing minimum wage or good available jobs, but it's something which is free and available right now.
But the nature of human beings is that those who are struggling and who are impacted by things like the minimum wage or who are doing other jobs, it's not just a matter of finding the time, but you know, I listen to you. Actually, now I'm drinking an iced tea here, which may be part of my problem. But
no problem
I listen
at
to
all.
you, and I listen. No judging, okay?
No judging.
I listen to you talk about the sort of distinctive phases of sleep and wakefulness. But I find myself, and I think a lot of people do, and particularly people who have stresses and anxieties in their life, can spend 7 or 8 hours in bed, but not necessarily 7 or 8 hours in bed sleeping, because they have anxieties that keep them up. So will there be like a companion book on tape, Arianna Huffington storytelling to help us get into that sleepful state?
Well,
or,
actually,
I mean, but seriously, what do you do about that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's the key. What I talked about, the transition, is absolutely essential. In the book, I have an appendix of meditations. Even if you don't meditate, I have picked among hundreds of meditations my favorite 12. And you can try them, and I bet you'll find one that you'll never hear to the end because it will put you to sleep, which is basically a way, when you wake up or you can't go to sleep, to slow down your mind and go to a deeper place where you can actually fall into a deep sleep. There are an enormous amount of breathing exercises, lavender teas. There are a lot of natural alternatives to what our culture has tended to do, which is take a pill. Because
medication rather than meditation.
Yes, exactly. Medication has become the easy solution, and it's very dangerous. I mean, you'll read in the book about all the dangerous side effects of Ambien and other sleeping pills, and also the fact that if you become chronically dependent on them, they become less and less effective. We saw what happened with Michael Jackson. We are now hearing Prince had not slept for 6 days. So, I mean, basically our body is not made for sleep deprivation. And also how we respond to anxieties differs from every human being. I mean, I have by my bed a book by Marcus Aurelius. The reason I pick that book and I read a paragraph every night is
Helps you sleep?
It really connects me with the importance of putting my own problems in a sense of perspective. Because Marcus Aurelius was the emperor of Rome. So he was in the arena. He was not checked out under a mango tree. He was dealing with invasions, plagues, everything you can imagine. But he was a Stoic philosopher also. So he had that sense of bringing gratitude into what he was doing, even in the most negative circumstances. And that's why another little technique that I mentioned in the book is ending your day with a gratitude list. At the end of the day, you can choose to focus on what you're anxious and worried about or on what you are grateful for. And every one of us has a mixture in our lives. There is no life that is full of only blessings. And I'm sure there's nobody here whose life is filled with only problems. So it's our choice. What are we going to put our attention on just before we go to sleep?
You mentioned medications. This is a huge industry for the pharmaceutical. I mean, you watch, if you are watching television.
Not before you go to sleep.
But you'll see a lot of ads for, more and more ads for sleep products. So you're talking about a cultural shift. That's a big part of the culture. The other is the medical profession itself, and who prescribe these products. How much of a culture shift is needed in medicine?
Oh, absolutely. You see, first of all, David, you know that we are the only country other than New Zealand that allows advertising of sleeping pills. And I mean, sleeping pills are horrifically...
I thought they count sheep in New Zealand.
They count sheep. Maybe they do both. But they are horrifically misrepresenting reality. You have all these happy people frolicking in fields, and then you have a cheery voice reading 92 side effects, including getting in a car and driving without being aware that you are driving, including suicidal tendencies, and things that basically no human being should want to countenance in exchange for a little shut-eye.
The last question on this is, I presume your feeling is that these 7 hours have to be 7 hours consecutively and not napping. You know, you talk to people, you know, I asked Charlie Rose, who does the morning show, and he does his show, tapes his shows for night.
Yeah, I have him in the book. He gets 3 naps a day.
Right, yeah.
Oh, you see, first of all, nothing that I'm saying is my feeling. I want to stress that. Everything is like based on science and data. And so the ideal is to complete all the cycles of sleep. There are 4 of them before you wake up. But life is not based on ideals. And there are many times that with the best intentions, you end up being on CNN until the early hours of the morning. Somebody here may have a big term paper to finish, or somebody may have a sick child. On the nights when we don't get a full 7, 8, or 9 hours sleep, whatever we need, I recommend trying to get a nap as soon as possible. Like I've been doing a lot of morning shows. I tell the news anchors, as soon as you're off the set, go get a nap. So that you can basically reset your day and not waste. I consider a day a wasted day, even if I get things done, but I'm not enjoying it. That's where I'm at. I basically cannot stand myself when I'm sleep deprived. I don't like the way I am. I don't like how irritable, moody I am, how I'm just kind of going through the motions. So if you begin to think of that...
I'm glad you're well rested.
No, you do. You wouldn't want to be around me.
I'd be remiss if I didn't take advantage of your presence here at the Institute of Politics to talk a little bit about you and a little bit about our politics right now, some of which keeps a lot of people from sleeping well. But just listening to you, I know you're not from the Midwest. And how But you know, I think about your life, and you've had, people say, well, you have to have chapters in your life, but you're like a 6-volume book. You grew up, you were child of a journalist in Greece, went on to Cambridge, got involved, you were in the debate society there, went on television there, came to the States. And when you emerged in politics, and part of it was as a result of your husband's activities, he was a congressman in California, you were an ally, a kind of compatriot of Newt Gingrich in the 90s. Tell me about that. What drew you to him, and how did you go from there to here?
So what was interesting is that when Michael, my ex-husband, was a congressman, I was asked to give a speech in which I talked about the social responsibility of Republicans and conservatives for the least among us, you know, the poorest among us. And it was on C-SPAN, and Newt Gingrich called me and said, we need to bring this into the Republican Party. Because you remember when Newt Gingrich became Speaker, he gave a speech in which he praised FDR, in which he talked about how our responsibility to the poorest among us is more important than our responsibility to balance the budget. So that was a very different Newt Gingrich rhetorically than from how he actually governed as Speaker of the House. So that's how I was drawn to him. And I was the kind of Republican that is becoming a kind of extinct species, you know, pro-choice, pro-gay rights, pro-gun control, but wanting a more minimal role for government. And what changed me was my recognition that, in fact, you needed a more active government to address a lot of the social problems we're facing, that you couldn't leave it just to in the hands of well-meaning philanthropists.
You, in the book I mentioned earlier, Third World America, which was written really at the peak of the Great Recession, but some of the principles are very much the same. You talked about the number of Americans who were struggling, and these statistics are well known, that, you know, the median income is what it was in 1999. 90% of Americans haven't really seen a raise effectively for a couple of decades. What is the impact of that, and do you see improvement since you wrote that book, which is now 6 years ago?
So we don't see real improvement in terms of the middle class feeling that the American dream is alive and well, and that their children will do better than they did, which was at the heart of the American dream. We don't see improvement in terms of college loans, which means that you start life with this huge burden. And
show of hands.
Show of hands, yeah. And also we see this alarming increase in suicides.
Yes.
Among middle class and middle-aged white men. So clearly, there is a fundamental problem we're dealing with, which is also what we see in the fact that sane people are voting for Donald Trump.
I want to get back to that point in a second, just on the suicide point, because it's relevant to the previous discussion. Also, an alarming increase in suicide among adolescent women,
yes,
girls, that have been attributed to social media. That's the theory that has bullying on social media and some other aspects of social media. You mentioned devices and our addiction to devices. Do you have concerns about the fact that technology, and you've been the Huffington Post was sort of on the cutting edge of the new technology and social media. Do you worry that we don't have a grasp of the sort of implications of it in terms of the societal implications of all of these technological changes?
Absolutely. I feel that, first of all, technology is unbelievably important. It's facilitated so much in our lives, but we need to put it in its place, and we need to put it in its place very quickly. And what is interesting, if you talk to our friends in Silicon Valley who created this world, they will tell you after a glass of wine that what is happening was intended. that it's not a bug of the system, it was a feature, that their goal was to consume as much of your attention and as much of your life as possible, and you cannot let them do that. And so it's up to us to set boundaries. And if you go and stay with any of them and they have young children, let me tell you, their children do not have iPads and iPhones. I stayed with one of them who shall remain nameless, and in the morning the children were playing with chickens and Legos. So they know the damage that it does to the development of your brain, to your sense of imagination and creativity. Nobody who is addicted to their devices is going to be a real creator. Because in order to create, you need to be by yourself. You need to be able to pull all the distractions aside and allow ideas from a deeper part of yourself to surface. And there was an alarming study done by Harvard and the University of Virginia, where they brought people in and they asked them, would you prefer to be alone for 15 minutes without devices or TV or anything, or get electric shock? And 67% of men chose electric shock. Among the wiser sex, women, 25% chose electric shock. But still,
that wasn't an opinion. That's also a scientific fact,
that's
right?
A scientific
that women are
fact.
wiser.
Yes, that is a completely scientific fact. Yes, I have a lot of data on that. Come on, you're married to Susan Axelrod.
Right.
You can
Exactly.
You have a daily proof of the fact that women are wiser than men.
So getting back to Trump and the alienated, we've also seen on the Democratic side that Bernie Sanders carved out a constituency among not just young people, but working class white voters, more men than women, who are feeling some of the same pressures. What do you think about the choice that now is shaping up between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump? I mean, what do you forecast here, and what does it mean in terms of that fundamental struggle about the middle class?
Well, first of all, I remain optimistic. I may be the last person who still hopes that something will happen that will not allow Donald Trump to go to Cleveland with the full deck of delegates he needs. I know this is getting less and less likely, but we can keep hope alive a few more days, at least until Indiana, right?
Yes, until Indiana, yes.
And because I really
Indiana.
believe that if he loses Indiana and doesn't get to Cleveland with 1237 delegates, then he will lose.
Right.
Because here's really the irony, that this is the man who's made his name on the art of the deal, and he's losing in the very deal making that would have allowed him, if he doesn't get the full complement of delegates the first time, to get
On the other hand,
second.
he's getting millions of votes, millions more than anyone else. He's losing on the inside game, you're absolutely right,
Yeah.
but he's winning on the outside
Yes.
game, and he's winning on the outside game with a nativist, anti-trade.
It's kind of so much worse than nativists and anti-trade. It's basically, I think it's horrifying, and I honestly think the media have done a lousy job, with the exception of the Huffington Post.
You, by the way, you made a decision, right? You have not. Have you stuck by it?
We have absolutely doubling down on our decision.
Not to cover Donald Trump.
No, we've been covering. Here's the thing. Let me explain our decision. We believe that Donald Trump, like Kim Jong-un, is both a buffoon and dangerous. So for as long as possible, we covered him like a buffoon in the entertainment section. On the day that he proposed to ban 1.2 billion Muslims from this country, which you have to admit, you are an incredible student of politics, is totally unprecedented. We started covering him as a clear and present danger, and at the end.
So you moved him into the front of the.
At the end of each article.
Do you think that's why he proposed it, so that he would get treated differently by the Huffington Post?
We have an editor's note at the end of each story that mentions him, that says we want to remind our readers that Donald Trump has called for the banning of all Muslims, is regularly inciting violence at his rallies, still believes that Obama was not born in this country. There is no presidential candidate anywhere who believes that. It's like believing the earth is flat. It should exclude you from any political conversation. And is a sexist, a xenophobe, and a racist. I think it is appalling that journalists have long interviews with him, including Bob Woodward, who had a 90-minute interview for the Washington Post and did not ask him about his wanting to ban Muslims, his inciting violence, and his being a birther. These three things are huge disqualifiers. I mean, listen, I don't agree with most of the things that Ted Cruz stands for, but he's not Donald Trump. He's not as dangerous, as unstable, the last person on earth you want anywhere near the nuclear button. You want him just on the snooze button. He brags.
Back to the sleep thing
Yeah,
again.
because he brags that he only gets 4 to 4.5 hours sleep. And you see, he represents, you know, the chronic examples of sleep deprivation.
But as I said, he's giving a lot of other people's reason not to sleep, and he's likely to be the nominee of the party. On the Democratic side, the Huffington Post has spoken to the progressive community since you began. Do you see a coming together behind Hillary Clinton as the nominee of the Democratic Party?
Yes, I feel absolutely, especially, you know, when it comes to a choice between the Democratic nominee, who is almost certainly going to be Hillary Clinton, and the possibility of Donald Trump on the Republican Party. I think everybody's going to rally around, including a lot of Republicans who have said that they would rather have Clinton than Trump.
Do you worry about Trump's ability to make inroads with those middle-class voters that you've written about, spoken of, who feel betrayed by the economic system, and who are looking for someone to really shake things up?
I do, because as you know, every election is a referendum, and there are candidates like Trump who appeal to our worst fears, and candidates like Obama in 2008 who appeal to our hopes and dreams and our better angels. And I think at the moment Trump is doing a very good job appealing to our worst fears.
On the question of President Obama, you were critical of him in the book in 2010, felt that he hadn't been aggressive enough in pursuing remedies to some of these economic problems and so on. Now we've got 6 years more history. How do you evaluate these last 7 years? How will history remember him? What has he done well and not well?
Well, I think he's done an enormous amount of good things on so many fronts, including keeping us out of a lot of West invasions and foreign entanglements, with the exception of Afghanistan, where, as you know, David, I believe we should not have stayed there. But I think when it comes to what's happened to African Americans, as you know, they're worse off after the 8 years of the first African American president, and that's a big problem. I think immigration still remains a huge problem. Obviously, you cannot expect him to solve everything in 8 years. And right now, I think we're at this moment when whatever you may want to say about the Obama presidency, it feels like so incredibly hopeful and important in the face of this campaign season.
You know, I'll ask you one last question. I'm getting a subtle signal here that we should begin the questions. You mentioned that you were grateful that the president kept us out of some foreign entanglements that others might have gotten us involved in. One of the planks of Donald Trump's foreign policy is non-interventionism. And he seems to be running to the left of Hillary Clinton on that. How do you evaluate that? How seriously do you take that?
I don't take anything Donald Trump says seriously. I don't think we should be wasting a second of our time evaluating his non-policies. His campaign is purely appealing to the worst in people, and that's what it is based on. It's not based on any policies. He's the least curious, the least educated about political matters candidate that has ever run.
So no endorsement from the Huffington Post. All right, let's take any questions. Yes, Aniri. Oh, I'm sorry.
And if you don't mind telling us who you are and what year you're in, or
And mention that you're president of the Student Advisory Board of the...
Yeah. Hi, my name is Anari. I'm a senior. I'm also the senior chair of the Institute of Politics Student Advisory Board, and I just came from Reynolds Club. It's amazing. Everyone should check it out. So my question is, earlier on in your career, you switched your political beliefs, and a lot of candidates and politicians these days get a lot of criticism for when they kind of switch their position, and you were known for saying that, you know, like you evolve and your positions change over time. So what would you say for the candidates that have had, like Hillary Clinton, have had a switch in beliefs on a lot of issues?
Oh, I think evolving and changing beliefs is not a problem at all. I think that we should be much more forgiving of that. I think sticking to a kind of doctrinaire ideology in the face of facts is a much bigger problem.
Other questions? I can't. You guys are contemplating the sleep cycle here.
Here we have one in the second row.
So you guys covered for a reasonable stretch of time. You covered Donald Trump as entertainment, and a lot of the debates, the presidential debates, the primary debates, have been kind of entertainment as well, more than factually based. What would be a more effective structure for honestly delving into the policy issues with all the candidates on one stage?
So, you know, you're right. I mean, debates have been, especially debates in which Donald Trump has taken part, have been like a train wreck. People turn on to see, you know, what's going to happen and who is he going to insult. And he's right when he says that if he was running a conventional campaign, people would not show up in such large numbers. And for me, I think what was missing was, again, singling out the big problems with his positions, which is different than having positions with which I may disagree or you may disagree. I think there are certain positions with which every sentient being disagrees. And one of these examples is recommending that people who protest in rallies are punched and taken out on a stretcher. Again, do you remember who was the last candidate running for president who suggested that?
George Wallace. Yeah.
Exactly. So you have to go back to George Wallace to find a parallel. That's not good.
You know, I want to ask you a question about Trump and Trumpism. As you look at Europe, you come from Europe, and you see these movements. We just saw it recently in Austria, but there, Maria Latella sitting here is a fellow who's a journalist from Italy. There are these nativist movements, nationalist movements all throughout Europe, and they're gaining strength. I know the Huffington Post now has gone global and so on. How much of a connection do you see between the emergence of a Donald Trump and Le Pen in France, Farage in Britain, and some of these other movements? I
think there is a real connection. In fact, you reminded me by mentioning that the Huffington Post is now in 15 countries, and we do more and more global coverage. But one of the things that I would love to invite you all is to write on the Huffington Post, like David has done, and about any subject, you know, from the rise of fascism to sleep. I'm going to give you my email address to make it super easy, and we'll give you a password, and you can write whenever you want. It's Arianna@HuffingtonPost.com. And as the Huffington Post is growing, one of my favorite things remains that we're a platform with great contributors, ranging from presidents and David Axelrod to students that nobody may have yet heard of, but have interesting things to say. And there is a complete kind of meritocracy, and I love that conversation. So please take me up on it.
Other questions? Yes. What you want to? There's a.
While you are getting the microphone, let me also tell you that, we've partnered with Toyota to give free rides to students at night on Uber, because we are running this campaign with Uber against drowsy driving, which is now killing more people than drunk driving. 8,000 deaths last year, 1.2 million crashes. And all you have to do is, when you order an Uber between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m., put the code Toyota Safety UC, and you can get a free ride. And between 1:30 and 3:30, I'm doing ride-alongs on Ubers. You can request me, and I'll do a personal sleep consultation with you. Did you know that, David?
The drivers get 7 hours of sleep, right?
We're working on it.
Arianna's on the board of Uber now, so
as
I
of
trust
one
every
day.
driver is well rested. Is well rested. Yes.
Hi, my name is Igalo Obi. I'm a third-year student in the college. And earlier you mentioned something about how, I guess, since President Obama has taken office, things haven't improved at all or are worse off for African Americans. So I just wanted you to clarify that statement and get a better understanding of where you're coming from on that and why you think so.
Well, I'm just looking at the data in terms of income, in terms of poverty levels, in terms of health outcomes. I think clearly he was very determined to be the president of all Americans, and I completely understand that. But in the meantime, minorities, and including, of course, when we look at incarceration rates and what's happening with our criminal justice system, these problems are still festering.
Well, it's not mine to be debate. I'm very careful not to be an advocate for anybody in this role. But certainly things like refundable tax credits, the Earned Income Tax Credit, Child Care Tax Credit, expanded Pell Grants, and the Affordable Care Act itself has had a direct impact on communities of color that's positive, right?
Right, but if you look at the numbers with all these good things happening, counteracting the bad things happening, what is the net result?
Well, there's no doubt that poverty itself has grown,
yeah.
and we have this great economic challenge in our country.
That's what I'm saying.
Yes, but that goes to all communities. Communities of color are deeply affected by that. Goes to the need for more education, for greater education and educational opportunities, more job opportunities, and so on. So there's no doubt that there's a lot of work to be done. But I would be remiss if I didn't.
No, absolutely. Things. But again, you're in agreement that the net effect, because of the growth in poverty.
I'm in agreement that we have a big challenge in our economy generally, that the economic advantages are limited, and more people are pedaling faster and faster.
Right.
And that's a structural issue that we have to address. I wish the presidential race was very much focused on real answers to that. So we have time for one more question. Yes?
I don't need a mic, do I?
Well, they and the viewing audience needs to hear you.
Hi, I'm Arushi. I'm a fourth year. I'm not involved in IOP, but I love your events. So I know that we were talking earlier about mental health and kind of how that's related to sleep deprivation, and I noticed that you talk a little bit about it in your book, but I haven't read it. But because we know that there's some kind of relationship between sleep deprivation and mental health outcomes, and it's not necessarily whether one leads to the other, but how do you suggest that we address that in a society where sleep deprivation is seen as almost a good thing?
Well, thank you for raising that. I was actually doing an event with Sylvia Barwell, the Secretary of the Health and Human Services Department, and she has been very focused on mental health and how the mental health problems among adolescents and college students. And it is now very clear that if you scratch the surface of mental health problems like anxiety, depression, you find sleep deprivation. So they're very intimately connected. And in fact, she was saying that she intends to make sleep one of the prevention pillars. If you now go to the health and wellness portal, the prevention pillars are nutrition and exercise, and adding sleep is going to dramatically accelerate this revolution of really giving sleep the respect that it deserves in our lives.
You know, listening to you talk about Sylvia Burwell and government, it makes me think of my years in government. And the one thing that I think unites everyone at the highest levels of government is lack of sleep.
Yes.
But
not with her. That is what is so interesting. She said how she has prioritized sleep, with the exception of the Ebola crisis. She gets 7 hours and 8 hours over the weekend. She has set up certain ground rules with her staff, which is, as she tells them, you don't have to be hatching your BlackBerry. You know, like in government, everybody's holding on to their BlackBerries in case they get a call, that the White House knows that if they need her, they have to call her. They cannot expect her to be on her BlackBerry and get texts and emails. So I think it will require certain leaders like that, because the public is paying a price for politicians and the political class's sleep deprivation. It doesn't really help us. In fact, Professor Ronenberg, who is the most important German sleep scientist, is quoted in the book saying that we've now reached the point where no politician would ever be seen smoking in public. Whether they smoke in private or not, nobody will be seen smoking in public. But they brag about being sleep deprived in public. Or like Larry Summers would famously fall asleep, right, during your White House meetings in public. Well, he said, in terms of the public interest, this is worse than smoking. You know, smoking may be very bad for your health, but it doesn't affect your decision making the way sleep deprivation does. So that's another thing that has to change. I mean, Ted Cruz sent a fundraising letter out the other day saying that I'm sacrificing my sleep and my health in this campaign for the public. And I wanted to say, why does it help me that you are exhausted and sick or not as healthy as you could be? How is this possibly an advantage for a political leader? But that's really...
Did you connect that with his decision to name Carly Fiorina as his running mate?
Yes, maybe another decision made in a moment of sleep deprivation.
Okay, with that, there isn't a more entrepreneurial and interesting and impactful person around, on our political and media scene than Arianna, and we're really pleased to have you. And my feeling is that if you've committed yourself to this sleep thing, that judging from your other projects, that we're all going to be getting a good night's sleep in pretty soon. So thank you.